Hey folks, today I'm going to be reacting to how to manage your money like the 1%. If you like what you see, please hit like or subscribe.
It's not about how much you make, it's about how you manage what you make. That's one of the key lessons I learned during my 10 years as an investment banker working with high net worth clients. Whether you're earning 50,000 or 500,000, the strategies used by the top 1% to grow and protect their wealth can be applied by anyone. And so in this video, I'm going to reveal the 15-65-20 system, a simple, proven approach that can help you manage your money like a financial expert. Let's get into it. Starting with the most important part, which
So before she gets into it, I've seen a variety of these systems. We will see how this one actually shakes out, but there's a variety of these that exist. They'll often state three numbers. Oftentimes it's for basically like savings of some sort, needs and wants, as an example. So there's like the 50-30-20 rule or system, which is like 50% of your income should go to needs, I think 30% to wants, and then 20% to savings. And so many of these systems are built around basically having a baseline configuration around your money and your finances. And this is often to kind of make financial decisions for you easier and automatic in a sense. And so this can be a good alternative for things like budgets. So if you've been working on your financial independence or your financial journey of some sort, and you've been trying to figure out how do you improve your financial situation time after time, often budgets come up as a standard tool, but these systems can be used in tandem with budgets or independent of budgets. And so what can happen is if you set some of these things up like automatically, for instance, and you move certain amounts of your paycheck to go into an account to pay your rent or your mortgage, and then you have a certain amount that goes into savings like an IRA or a 401k or just your emergency fund or whatever it is, then you can end up spending basically whatever you want in your wants category for any purpose. And then you don't necessarily need to budget as much because you already know high level whatever you spend that money on, it's up to you to be spending it for whatever you think makes sense. And so systems like this can help be different ways of managing your money. And I think of them as like diets for health purposes, which is like at the end of the day, it's about calorie intake um, versus calorie burned for weight loss, as an example. And it's very similar for financial purposes, which is at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how much money are you getting in and how much money is going out. And so diets are a variety of tools to help individuals kind of focus on a particular aspect that they find reasonable to them such that they can achieve this goal. And I consider budgets or these systems in a very similar context, which is they're basically ways for us to think about our money in order to force the behavior that we want and the outcome that we want. And it doesn't really matter which system you use as long as you're fundamentally getting to the important part, which is you're spending less money than you're making on things that you need or want collectively, and you're saving some amount of money, hopefully paying off debt, etc.
is the 15 cents. That's how much of every dollar you make that should be reserved and put aside for yourself. This is where long-term security really begins. And you're doing this for two really important reasons. Reason one, peace of mind. Imagine you're going about your day when suddenly you get a flat tire, a surprise medical bill, or an urgent family emergency happens. Without a solid emergency fund or a cash cushion in place, you're not just worried about the surprise that has just come up. You're now also worried about how you're going to pay for it. And then this can quickly derail your finances and send you into a tailspin. But not if you have that 15% cushion in place. Start by building a quick access solution fund, enough to cover 1 month of essential expenses. This is your first line of defense against life's little surprises. And 1 month.
An emergency fund is a great thing to have. Seems like she's going to start going through some more details here on it. But as she highlighted, one of the big things that gets people into trouble is not being able to pay the bills a particular month. And then maybe they start to spiral out by maybe putting something on credit that they can't afford, or getting like a payday loan or something. And this starts to snowball in a bad way against you, where then you're trying to catch up for this emergency that previously happened, and then that's going to make you more susceptible to emergency in the future, and then it can just keep building on itself, and this is where really bad things happen. So again, having a cushion of any amount really is going to be of benefit to you, but the more you can push this out, I think she's mentioning right here 1 month. Oftentimes, I think classically 3 to 6 months is what is recommended. Basically, however much time you think it would require for you to find a replacement job in case you were to lose your job, as a terrible thing that does happen to folks on a regular basis, and you're not exempt from, and therefore you should be prepared for that in eventuality. But even starting with 1 month is great. Even starting with $100 or $1,000, like, definitely don't think of this as something that you only can do if you can save 1 month or 3 months or 6 months. This should be something that you're starting on, even if it's $1 or $5 or $10. Literally just having that little bit of extra might make or break some emergency that you have in the future, or maybe gives you enough flexibility to avoid one of these very terrible options like payday loans or overextending yourself on credit card debt.
Worth of living expenses isn't as much as you think it might be. It doesn't include the Netflix subscriptions you have or any other discretionary spending that you make. It just covers your core costs, things like your rent and mortgage, groceries, transportation, utility bills. From there, work your way up to 3 to 6 months worth of your core expenses. This emergency cushion gives you the ultimate peace of mind, knowing that if something major happens, a job loss, a health scare, or any other unexpected crisis, you're still covered and you won't have to go into debt to handle it. The security of just having those 3 to 6 months of essential expenses saved up means you can focus on dealing with the emergency itself rather than stressing about how to pay for it. The second reason to save that 15% is to make your money work for you. And you don't need to be a financial expert to start doing this. And in fact, you might already be doing it without even realizing. First, let me show you why this is so powerful and how to get started, even if you're a complete beginner. Picture two people, Janet and Mike. At age 30, Janet invests a lump sum of $10,000. She earns a steady 6% return each year and doesn't touch the investment for 20 years. By the time she turns 50, that initial $10,000 has grown to an impressive $32,071 without her adding a single extra dollar. Now, let's look at Mike. Mike waits until he's 40 to start investing. He contributes $2,000 every year for the next 10 years, and it's also earning the same 6% annual return. By the time he turns 50, his $20,000 investment has grown to $27,944. That's not bad, but it's still less than Janet, even though Mike invested twice as much overall. The difference comes down to the power of time and compound interest. Janet's money had an extra 10 years to grow and compound, and that extra decade made all of the difference. Her initial $10,000 snowballed into $32,000 even without her adding a single penny. This is what Einstein meant when he called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. The longer you let your money work for you, the more dramatically it can multiply. It's like a runaway train with your returns earning even more returns. So where do you start? You have a few options. First, if you're contributing to your workplace retirement plan, then you've already started this process. The employer match is essentially free money. You're all going
So as she's highlighting here, she's mostly discussing investments at this point in time. Again, since this is more of a foundational money management video, I'm going to at least go a little bit more basic here before she gets too far ahead, which is, as she highlighted, saving 15% is important. Before you're starting to think about like long-term investments of some sort, you should probably also start thinking about high yield savings accounts. And so this is going to be a key one, because if you are in a scenario where you can't make ends meet, if you don't have this extra interest that's on there, you're basically losing money that you would have for no work, no time investment other than initial setup of your bank account. And so just for reference, like most banks in America have an interest rate of less than a percent. I think oftentimes they're like 0.1%. And so you don't really think of them as interest at all. Like for the most part, you're not expecting it or you're not relying on it. At this point in time, you can easily find high yield savings accounts of 4 to 5%. While that's not necessarily going to be true in the future, that is something that is going to outpace those 0.1%. So these will definitely be tied to broader inflation and broader interest rates. And it might go as low as like 1 or 2%, but it'll still be drastically more than 0.1%. And so this is where 1% of $100 is obviously $1. 0.1% is 10 cents. And so having an extra dollar at the end of the month is going to be more meaningful than having 10 cents at the end of the month. And that could make or break the difference between you accumulating into your emergency fund at the beginning or not. And again, if you have even more money, like you have $1,000, that's $10 that you might be getting, and technically that's a year, not per month. So that's where that could be just enough for you to start to accumulate, and then that $10 could start to accumulate a little bit more and a little bit more, and that compounding can happen not just in the stock market, but in anything that has positive returns on investment and have some type of interest rate associated with them. And again, this is something that I would definitely encourage anybody to do if they're just getting started. This is a great way to just see compound interest work in your favor instead of against you, which is what most of us see and are introduced to at the beginning, like through student loans, car loans, mortgages, etc. And so this can help you start to build that basic foundation. She is covering the employer match here. And so that is often a very good thing to do, but this is going to help set you up for the future. I still generally recommend it to try to get to an employer match as soon as possible. But again, I think before this step is getting at least that 1 month emergency fund. And in order to get that emergency fund as fast as possible, I'd recommend getting like a high yield savings account ASAP if you don't have one already.
Organization will contribute an extra dollar or an extra pound for every dollar or pound you put in up to a certain limit. So for example, say you make 50,000 per year and there's a 5% match. That means for every pound or dollar you contribute up to 2,500, your employer will also contribute the same. In the UK, you're automatically enrolled into this plan, but you also want to do a really important thing, and that is to make sure that you are contributing enough to max out the match that is offered. That's a really great way to supercharge your savings, since your contributions are made pre-tax and the money grows tax-free until withdrawal. Secondly, let's talk about tax-advantaged accounts. In the UK, you've got the stocks and shares ISA. In the US, it's a Roth IRA. These accounts allow your investments to grow completely tax-free. That means no taxes on the dividends, no taxes on the capital gains. The government gives you these special accounts as an incentive to save and invest for the long run. But bear in mind that the money you use to invest in it has already been taxed because it comes from the money you earn from your paycheck. So that is after you pay taxes on it. So again, you pay tax at the start, not at the end. Whereas for the workplace retirement plan we just mentioned earlier, you pay tax at the end and not at the start. The key is to max out all of these tax advantage accounts first before moving on to regular taxable investment accounts. Now, I know you might be thinking, okay, I know what account I need. Now, what do I invest in? The secret is to keep it super simple with passive funds.
So before she continues here, also, she highlighted the Roth IRA, but as she mentioned, it's usually good to invest in your like tax advantaged accounts or incentivized accounts. And so basically anything that has an acronym really is going to be one of those, like 401k, IRA, HSA. And while I'm not a financial advisor, and you should probably seek one if you're looking into which ones you should invest in, there's a variety of ones that work well. And so just to call out specifically, since there's so many of these, you would probably want to maximize as many of them as possible before you start looking into taxable accounts. And so employer matching for your 401k, this usually is only on a certain percent. So she highlighted like 100% of the first 5% that you invest. And so what often happens is an employer can do 100% or 50% of a certain number. So for instance, in that example, it's maybe 100% of the first 5%. Another employer might do 50% of the first 10, and that would be the same number that they're giving to you, but they're basically forcing you to invest a little bit more to get that same amount of money. And so usually doing employer match is one of the best ways of starting your investments and starting for like a retirement savings. And then there's also more in a 401k that you can invest. So even 5 or 10% is likely not going to cover maxing out your 401k. So that's also another option that you have, is to keep investing into it, not just whatever is matched, but beyond it. There's also an HSA account for a health savings account, which you can save money and put into if you kind of have the high deductible health savings plan in America. And one of the advantages is that once you hit a certain threshold, they allow you to actually invest that money into the market and allow that basically to grow with inflation. And that one is pretty high tax efficiency, but you usually can't put too much into it. Then there's also the IRA, and I think that's an individual retirement account, is what I believe that stands for. And this basically allows folks to invest into a retirement vehicle without going through like an employer. And this also has a limit on it. And that's something that you can do separate. And so all of these accounts will give you some type of an advantage. And you can look into how you progress into each of those. But you likely should be going through each of those vehicles and ensuring that you're maxing them out as best as you can before you get to taxable accounts.
Is essentially just a way to track the overall stock market. These funds automatically diversify your money across hundreds of different companies, so you're not putting all of your eggs in one basket, and they come with super low fees, which means more of your money gets to work for you. Once you've got those tax advantage accounts set up and you're contributing regularly, you can let those passive funds do their thing. No need to constantly tinker or try to beat the market. Just set it and forget it. It's literally the lazy person's path to wealth, and it's a strategy used by the world's most successful investors. I go into a lot more detail on this in my free masterclass, which has 3 more slots left for today and tomorrow. We cover the differences between the type of funds, the common mistakes that can cost beginners thousands, and how to turn just 100 a month into over $1 million. The link is in the description below this video. And again, it's completely free if you want to check it out. Before we dive into the rest of the video, I wanted to take a moment to introduce the sponsor of today's video, and that is Skillshare, an online learning platform which I've personally been using and benefiting from for the past 2 years. Skillshare offers thousands and thousands of high quality classes across a really wide range of creative and business related topics taught by industry experts and top-notch instructors. What I personally love most about Skillshare is its commitment to making learning accessible and fun. The classes are broken down into really short, digestible lessons that can fit into your schedule, whether you have 15 minutes or a full hour. And with topics spanning from everything from graphic design and entrepreneurship to productivity hacks and personal finance, there's really something for everyone to explore and expand their skills. Right now, I've just finished and I'm implementing the learnings from the class by Jules on how to create the ultimate Google Calendar workshop. This is what I mean. There's literally a class on the most random things that you don't even think of, but will add value to your life. If you want to check it out for free, the first 500 people to use the link in the description will get 1 month of a free trial. You can binge watch all the videos you want. Now let's talk about the 65 cents.
So just before the sponsor segment there, she highlighted that she had a class. She did mention at the beginning of this video that she has some type of financial background, though it sounded to be in investment banking or something like that. Something that I would call out for anybody if you're watching these videos or other videos, I'm sure there's going to be a number of folks who are interested in selling you a course on something really at all in order to make revenue off of it. But something I would advise is make sure that you can trust that individual. I'm not very familiar with this individual themselves to say one way or the other. But something that is useful is you can also go to like a financial advisor. And there's actually like regulations and certifications for things like being fiduciary, which means that they are actually doing things that are in the best interest of their clients. And if they are not a fiduciary financial advisor, even if they are a financial advisor, they are still allowed to do things that are not in your best interest. So this could be like promoting products that earn them some type of like finder's fee or commission, even if it's not necessarily the best for you. And so this is something where even if somebody is a financial advisor, which I'm unsure if this person is, they could still be giving you less than ideal advice in order to help themselves have some financial or monetary incentive. So again, I'd encourage you, if you're looking for financial advice, find a financial advisor, find one that is fiduciary specifically, and they will be able to give you the best advice, and you'll know that it is as helpful as it can be for your purposes individually.
expense. That's the portion of every dollar that should go towards your fundamental expenses. This is where the basics live. Things like the rent or mortgage, groceries, utilities, transportation, and any other must-haves that keep life running smoothly. And this is the trickiest part because these expenses have a sneaky way of ballooning out of control. You know how it goes. You get a raise and suddenly that old apartment feels too small, or you decide to upgrade your car, and what seems like progress can actually backfire when those upgrades come with higher rent and maintenance or insurance costs. Your expenses will grow to match your income unless you fight them off. And that's where setting a firm limit on your fundamental expenses makes all the difference. The 65% cap keeps your core expenses in check so that you aren't scrambling just to cover the basics. And I'm not going to lie, this is in many cases harder said than done, especially if you're living in an expensive city. And according to the Office for National Statistics, housing is the largest spending category, representing about 19% of total weekly expenditure. So that includes things like rent or mortgage, interest payments, and utility bills. And then the second largest category is transportation, which makes up approximately 14% of household spending. And that includes things like vehicle purchases, maintenance, fuel, and public transport. Have a look.
So I'm just going to go back to that segment a little bit, just so folks can take a look at some of these numbers in case they're interested. So she just highlighted the housing as number one and transport as number two. It seems like three is recreation, four is food and non-alcoholic drinks, and then five is restaurants and hotels. And those categories, I think, are pretty representative of what people end up spending most of their money on. And some of these things you have more control over than others. And so your fuel costs or power costs are obviously going to be difficult to manage, other than like trying to shut off all your lights or reduce the heat and all those things. Picking a housing area that can be more beneficial to you can be useful. I think this is something that's definitely tough, but will have some of the biggest bang for your buck. I think also restaurants are a big bang for your buck segment because there's nothing requiring you to go out to a restaurant. You could generally cook at home if necessary, and you could basically wipe out most of that category. And anything that you eat at a restaurant is going to be more expensive. I think oftentimes restaurants charge 4 or 5x the price of what it actually costs to make that meal, because obviously they need to pay for the staff, the real estate that it's in, and they also actually have to make a profit for themselves for them to want to keep being in business. You don't have as much of that if you go to a grocery store and just buy the ingredients yourself and make a meal. And so that could be a great way of giving yourself an activity that you might be interested in and saving money. And again, housing areas. This is something where if you have flexibility on the location, maybe living in a slightly different area, maybe a little bit farther away from major cities can be cheaper, generally speaking, or maybe getting roommates or things like that. This is where, as she highlighted, often we have our lifestyles inflate with our income. And something that I think makes this a little bit easier is making a tough choice early on. So doing something like living a little bit farther away, living with roommates, or a combination of those two things can set you up on a good financial foundation. So that way you can dedicate certain amounts of money to savings and investing, and then you can progress into more advanced segments. And that will allow you to really focus in on that core aspect of your financial journey and also allow yourself to increase your lifestyle over time. But since you're starting at a lower baseline expectation, you can regularly get increases to your lifestyle. And you'll feel like you're like anybody else. You're improving year after year. You're getting nicer things. You're being able to do more things. And I find that can be a much more sustainable way of doing it, is make the hard decision early and then allow yourself to kind of see and reap the benefits of that over time.
Of household spending. And that includes things like vehicle purchases, maintenance, fuel, and public transport. Have a look at your own spending. Write down what your biggest spending categories are. Once you know where your money is currently going, you can then look for ways to optimize the biggest costs. Can you negotiate a better deal on your rent? Can you swap that daily commute for a more affordable option? It's not about cutting out the little joys in life. It's about finding ways to keep the big unavoidable costs under control, giving your budget more breathing space for the fun things in life. And that last 20 cents is where that fun begins. In the book, Die with Zero, the author shares a really powerful idea, which I absolutely love. And it's that the ultimate goal isn't to die with a massive bank account, but to use your money to create a rich and a fulfilling life. And the 1% know the secret. They intentionally make room in their budgets for guilt-free enjoyment. And so should you, because all work and no play is a surefire path to burnout. And studies show that people who give themselves a little flexibility in their budgets are far more likely to stick to their financial goals over the long haul. It's kind of like.
So I think that's a great point that she's making right now, which is giving folks some flexibility allows them to, splurge a little bit here and there. And so that is a nice thing to have for yourself and to give yourself some of that flexibility. One thing I want to comment on, she highlighted this book of Dying with Zero. I see a variety of folks highlight this as they're giving financial advice. And personally, I consider that theory and that topic more of a philosophical one than a financial one, in so much as if you're trying to think about your best financial picture, you don't want to risk overspending. And I believe even the person who came up with that book, I believe, entered into that scenario recently, if I'm not mistaken, and others who follow this run into this possibility where it's going to be nearly impossible to perfectly aim for zero at the end of your life because you don't know inflation rates, you don't know when you will pass away eventually. And so there's so many factors that are outside of your control. And so you might mess up and then end up in a scenario where you have nothing and you maybe have multiple years of your life left. And that could be a stressful situation to be in. So from a financial standpoint, it's not something that I would recommend. I think you can still do a lot of the principles that that book covers, like being generous with your money, being charitable, dedicating budgets for yourself and your personal enjoyment without having the specific goal of hitting $0, just because that's a very hard number to achieve. And that's where I'm sure each of us can think to ourselves on some of these as well, of imagine trying to get your exact bank balance next month to be an exact number. That would be a pretty hard thing to do. But let's say you could do that. Imagine trying to project out like a year from now and having your bank budget hit a specific number. That would be nearly impossible. I don't know anybody who can actually do that. And in these scenarios, they're even highlighting like 20 or 30 years of hitting a specific number. Obviously, zero is an easier number than any other number because you can just spend up into that. But I think the sentiment still holds true, which is it's going to be really hard to target any number. And if you mess up on that, you can be in some financial trouble. So I wouldn't recommend that, generally speaking, from a financial standpoint. But I think you can gain value from some of the lessons that they discuss there, like being generous and enjoying your money while you're alive.
Going on a strict diet, if you never allow yourself a cheat meal, eventually you're going to break and binge. That same principle applies to money. Now, you might be thinking, won't that derail my savings and investments? Not at all. In fact, probably the opposite. If you don't carve out a portion for guilt-free spending, you're much more likely to overspend down the road, or even worse, give up on your savings and investments entirely. That's why the 15-65-20 rule recommends using 20% of your income for fun, enjoyment, and personal fulfillment. In fact, you could even reframe this 20% as an investment in yourself. By making sure you stay motivated, balanced, and energized, you're actually increasing the odds of sticking to your long-term financial plans. So in practice, this can mean treating yourself out to an exceptionally nice dinner once a month, or finally pulling that trigger on a new bag that you've been eyeing, or even planning a really fun getaway with friends. The key is to give yourself permission to enjoy 20% of your income without feelings of guilt or shame. So those are my top tips on managing your money like the 1%, the 15-65-20 rule. If you found this video useful, I'd really appreciate if you could take a second to subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and see you next week.
So something I actually would like to cover, since the sentiment of the video was how to manage your money like the 1%, something I would highlight is that actually, generally speaking, the higher income a particular individual is, generally their savings rate goes up noticeably. And so this is where the average American only saves less than 5%. But if you're particularly affluent, like in the top 1%, they're saving like 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50% of their income because they have so much here. So I did want to highlight that, as it is slightly disingenuous to highlight this as managing your money like the top 1%, because they are unlikely to manage it this way. They're likely going to drastically increase their savings rate, while that is only possible because they have higher income, I did want to flag that for folks. If you are trying to make your way towards the 1%, I think this rule still fits. Again, as long as you're saving and investing, even more than 5%, technically speaking, if you invest or save 6% or more, you will slowly outpace the average American and then slowly rise in ranks to enter the 1%. But the 1% likely do not manage using this specific system, um, just as a caveat. But generally, saving as much as you can will help you achieve financial success and allow you to rise in ranks in the percentiles of wealth or income if that's what you're choosing to do. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.